On the surface, 1978 was a year of loud music and bright colors, but beneath the surface, in the forgotten corners of America, it was just cold. It was a relentless, freezing November night, the kind of rain that doesn't just wash the streets, but seems to wash away your very hope. On a deserted stretch of highway, miles away from any real city, stood a dying diner. Its yellow neon sign flickered, buzzing like a dying insect. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, old cigarette smoke, and profound regret. Sitting in the furthest booth, wrapped in the shadows, was a man named Arthur. He was 52 years old, but his eyes carried the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. Arthur had lost everything: his business, his family, his pride. He was staring at a half-empty mug of cold coffee, tracing the rim with a trembling finger. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was just waiting for the courage to walk out into the freezing rain and never come back. He had decided that tonight, the story of Arthur would quietly end. The diner was entirely empty. The waitress was asleep behind the counter. The only sound was the heavy rain beating against the thin glass. And then, shattering the heavy silence, the payphone on the rusted wall began to ring. Shrill, loud, violent. Who calls a forgotten diner at 3 in the morning? The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, wishing the noise would stop. But it didn't. With a heavy sigh, carrying the exhaustion of a man who just wanted the world to be quiet, he stood up. He walked slowly to the wall, lifted the heavy metal receiver, and held it to his ear. He didn't say a word. Suddenly, an absolute hurricane burst through the earpiece. It was a young man's voice, frantic, breathless, bouncing off the walls. Within 10 seconds, the voice morphed from a Scottish sailor to an angry French chef, to a panicked old woman. It was a rapid-fire assault of jokes, characters, and desperate, hyperactive energy. Arthur stood there in the dim light, closing his eyes. The contrast was physically painful. On one end of the line, a man who had completely given up. On the other end, a man trying so hard to entertain that he sounded like he was running out of air. Slowly, Arthur interrupted the chaos. His voice was a barely audible whisper. "Son," he said, "I don't know who you are, and I don't know who you're trying to reach, but you have the wrong number." The hurricane paused for a split second, taking a breath. Arthur continued, his voice cracking. "And believe me, tonight is the wrong night to try and make someone laugh." Then something extraordinary happened. The manic energy on the other end of the line vanished. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on a carnival. For 10 long seconds, there was nothing but the crackle of the static wire between them. Arthur was about to hang up, but then a new voice spoke. It was the same man, but the characters were gone. The jokes were gone. The voice was deep, soft, and terrifyingly vulnerable. "Why is it the wrong night, friend?" the young man asked. Arthur didn't know why, but in that lonely diner to a total stranger, he confessed. He poured out his broken heart. He talked about the crushing weight of being invisible. He talked about the cold highway outside and what he planned to do. The stranger just listened. He didn't offer cheap advice. He didn't tell him everything would be okay. He just breathed on the other end of the line, sharing the silence. When Arthur finally stopped, the young man spoke again. His voice trembled slightly. "I hear you," he whispered. "You know, I stand on stages. I make hundreds of people laugh until they cry. They clap for me. They look at me like I'm magic." The young comedian took a shaky breath. "But when the lights go out, and I go back to an empty hotel room, the silence is so loud it physically hurts. I feel so invisible, I sometimes have to look in the mirror just to make sure I still exist. The loudest guy in the room is usually the one who is the most terrified of the quiet. For the next 45 minutes, two ghosts sat on a wire. They never exchanged names. They never saw each other's faces. Before the call ended, the young comedian made one final request. "Do me a favor, friend," he said softly. "Don't walk out into the rain. Not yet. Just wait for the dawn. Sit in that booth and watch the sun come up. I promise you, when the light hits the window, that coffee won't feel so cold anymore." The line went dead. Arthur slowly hung up the phone. He walked back to his booth. He sat down, and he waited. 2 hours later, the rain stopped. A faint golden glow began to break over the highway. The neon sign buzzed one last time and turned off. The morning had come, and Arthur was still there. This story might be a whisper lost in the rain of the 1970s, but the truth it carries belongs entirely to the soul of Robin Williams. He was a man who couldn't always extinguish the fire burning inside his own mind, but he used those very flames to keep the rest of the world warm. He stood guard in the dark for all of us, throwing his laughter like a shield against the crushing weight of reality. There will never be another soul so incredibly loud, and yet so deeply, beautifully gentle. If you believe that a soul is measured by the light it gives to others in their darkest hours, and if you want to help us keep the profound memory of cinema's greatest legends alive, please follow our channel. Together, let's keep the dawn coming.